We tend to think of democracy as just, voting. But what if I told you there's a science to it? Today, we're going to dig into a pretty radical idea from some leading experts that the success of a democracy has less to do with the ballot box and a whole lot more to do with the quality of the minds that are actually casting the vote.
To really get our heads around this, we first have to challenge some of our most basic ideas about democracy. We need to look right past all the political slogans and get a look at the hidden mechanics of how we, as people, actually make decisions.
You hear it all the time, right? Free and fair elections. It's treated like the absolute gold standard. But is it really enough? I mean, is the simple act of checking a box the only thing that truly creates a democracy?
Okay, this comparison really brings the problem into focus. Look at this. Both the United States and Iran hold national elections. In both countries, citizens go and vote. But let's be real, no one would ever confuse their systems of government or the results they produce as being the same thing.
This tells us pretty clearly that the election itself is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more going on underneath the surface. So to understand what's really driving the outcomes, we need a totally new framework.
So for this entire analysis, we're going to lock in on this very specific academic definition. Notice it's not about systems or political parties. It's about something much more fundamental, the right of everyone involved to have a real voice and actual decision-making power. Let's keep that definition in our back pocket.
Now, to understand why the quality of that decision-making is so crucial, let's try a little thought experiment. It's a powerful analogy, and it starts in a place where expertise is literally a matter of life and death. So, just imagine this scene. A patient's life is hanging in the balance. A whole team of surgeons and top specialists are gathered together to make a critical call. The stakes could not possibly be higher. In that room, everything, and I mean everything, is about professionalism and expertise. They're discussing incredibly complex details, and their one and only goal is to pick the most qualified person on the planet to perform this surgery. Their knowledge is everything.
Now imagine the door bursts open, and some guy storms in shouting this. This person has absolutely zero medical qualifications, just this bizarre obsession. It is completely and totally irrelevant to the life or death decision happening in that room.
So, what do you think the doctors would do? Would they sit down and debate him, take a vote on who should perform the surgery? Of course not. They'd call security and have him thrown out immediately. And they'd be right to do it.
And this little scenario, as absurd as it is, points to a fundamental truth. When a decision requires specialized knowledge, the only people who can meaningfully participate are the ones who actually have that knowledge. Anything else is just plain irresponsible.
All right, so let's take that exact same logic, that principle we all just instinctively agreed on for the operating room, and let's apply it to the much, much bigger and more complex world of running a whole society.
See, the experts behind this new science argue that governing a country is at least as complicated as performing surgery, which brings us to a pretty uncomfortable question. If we demand expertise in the operating room, why do we so often abandon that very same principle when it comes to making huge decisions about our country?
And this quote makes the stakes crystal clear. Without qualified participants, democracy is just a roll of the dice. And the source points to one of history's most chilling warnings, the Athenian democracy that, through a popular vote by citizens who didn't understand the issue, condemned its greatest thinker, Socrates, to death.
So if the quality of the participants is the thing that really matters, what determines that quality? Is there a scientific way to understand this capacity for understanding?
Well, the science we're exploring today identifies what it calls the human thinking function. You can think of it like your brain's built-in operating system for rational thought. It's the tool we're all born with that lets us analyze information and make logical choices. But there's another force at play here, something called the faith function. Now, this isn't just about religion. It's any system of belief. When it gets manipulated, say by propaganda or a really rigid ideology, this function can actually get distorted and end up overriding our rational thinking, basically pre-programming our decisions for us.
So how can you tell if a population's thinking function is activated? Well, this model suggests we can use education levels as a kind of rough proxy. The theory is that in a country like the United States, even with all its chaotic politics, there's a high baseline of formal education. And that acts as a kind of guardrail, training the population in critical analysis and helping to prevent truly irrational outcomes.
So what's the big takeaway here? What's the foundation for progress?
Well, the experts behind this argue that by understanding these internal functions, we can finally see a clear path to activating our potential and creating a more harmonious society.
And what's really amazing is that this science suggests that, at our very core, humans are democratic creatures. It's like we're wired for collaboration and collective problem solving. Our innate thinking function is what powers it.
This slide basically lays out the perfect conditions for that collaboration to work. And it doesn't matter if it's a family or a whole nation. When all the participants actually understand the issue and can communicate openly, democracy stops being just a political system, it becomes the most effective and efficient way to make decisions. The absolute key, though, is that shared understanding.
And this is the real power of thinking this way. It's a tool that helps you cut through all the noise. The next time you hear a politician using democracy as a cheap slogan, you can stop and ask the real question: are the conditions for informed, rational decision-making actually in place here?
And that leaves us with this final, really powerful thought to chew on. If better collective thinking actually leads to a better society, then maybe the most important work any of us can do is to cultivate our shared ability to reason. The question isn't if we should do it, it's how do we begin?